It's showtime. I'm live. Just sent off the notifications to John and Patrick both. Really looking forward to this conversation. It's definitely a contentious topic, as I can see already based on the comments on the stream. Let me just actually deal with these real quick here before the gentlemen do join us. Actually, let me get the notification sent out on the other social media pages as well. Oh, what's going on with the sound here? Oh, there we go. Let me get the notification sent out on the other social media pages. Okay, echo. Okay, here we go. Sent off. And done. Okay. Now, just like I say, before we get to where everybody is, bring everyone to the stream, let me just deal with these comments real quick. So Malice 911, thank you for joining the stream. I really appreciate that. What's to discuss? It's murder, plain and simple. How women can feel empowered by the right to kill their own babies is beyond me. Oh, well, we live in interesting times. So just give me 1 sec. I'll get back to you on that one. I'm just going to bring on Patrick to the stream. Hey, how you doing, Patrick?
Not bad. Good to see you.
It's great to see you too as well. I'm just waiting for John. I just sent the notification the same time I sent you to John, and he'll be joining us shortly. John Hicks is his name. And once again, really appreciate you coming on and having this discussion. And I'm seeing already in the chat, like that's what I was just referencing before I brought you on here, is Malice 911 wants to discuss. But as I'm about to suggest, and I'm sure you'll have lots to say regarding that too, is there is more to that. It's not just a simple matter. I wish it was a black and white issue that we could just say it's one or the other. There's no nuance to it. And whoever's on the opposite side of what I believe is wrong, that would be great. And then I could just pat myself on the back and I'd be done. Matter of fact, we wouldn't even have a real much of a point to have this discussion. But as I'm sure you're going to bring to the table as well as John, is there's a lot of nuance to the abortion debate and discussion. And no matter what side or aspect or what your opinion is regarding it, I'm sure based on what we're going to all have to say today, at least the people that's going to be watching going to kind of walking away from at least thinking that, yeah, maybe there's a little bit more here to it than what is on the surface, right? But if you want to just actually introduce yourself to the folks that are already in the chat, maybe give a little background of your history, or if you just want to say why you want to be actively involved and participate in this conversation today, just go ahead there, Patrick.
For sure. Yeah, I'm Patrick. I was born and raised in Toronto, and I went to the University of Waterloo. I studied chemical engineering there, took the co-op program, and graduated a couple years ago. I then went on and did an outdoor leadership program, and I'm now currently in Guelph doing some tutoring and freelance writing. I started getting involved in the Liberty movement about 3 years ago, and I've been really passionate about it ever since. I've been writing some articles for Being Libertarian, and more recently for the Foundation for Economic Education. And that's been a really great experience. I've also been involved in the pro-life movement in various capacities through university. And so I'm pro-life, and I'm excited to have this discussion about how libertarian principles, the non-aggression principle, interact with the abortion argument and get into that debate.
What happened? Hello, you still there, Patrick?
Yeah, can you hear me?
How you were a contributor, and you had mentioned that in the message. You had mentioned that you were a contributor to Being Libertarian and FEE, which both of them I have respect, especially FEE. They put out some great content. Really happy to see that organization, and I share a tremendous amount of that content. But you did get cut off, and I think we both did there for a short timeline.
Oh, okay.
I'm hoping the internet connection holds out. The last few I've had has been pretty good. I'm hoping it's going to hold out for today as well. But if there was something at the back end of that we might have missed,
sure.
If you want to repeat that.
Yeah, so I've been writing a little bit for the Foundation for Economic Education, and I've also been involved in the pro-life movement in various capacities through university and since. And so I'm very passionate about that, and I think it's really interesting to discuss how libertarian principles interact with the abortion debate and the non-aggression principle and all of that.
Right. Excellent. And that's the thing that I'm actually really interested in. So I'm glad that you are going to be taking so you do definitely take the pro-life perspective on it. Awesome. That's great. So like I say, let me just double check and see if John has replied back here. Maybe if he's having any issues with his, sometimes it might be that you're not giving the mic permission or something. It's usually pretty simple to join these streams, but let me see here. But he hasn't replied yet, but he did. Last time we communicated, yeah, so that was 10:13 a.m. my time, so 11:13 on Eastern time. So he should be by. Anyways, like I say, in the meantime or in the interim, we'll just kind of deal with. I was going to go through a few of the people, few of the comments actually on here. So let's deal with that because there he is there now. Okay, just one sec here. Let's bring John in. Good timing there, John. I was actually just getting ready to deal with another. And actually, before we all do get into it, maybe that's how we can start in this, deal with a couple of comments from people that are already in the stream. But if you want to just take a moment, just like Patrick did, I gave Patrick just a couple minutes to introduce himself, why your background and what got you interested in having this conversation in regarding this particular topic there, John. And once again, I really appreciate you joining us today.
Awesome. Thanks for having me. Can you hear me okay?
Oh, yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, perfect. Awesome. So my background, let's see here. I spent some time in the military. Did my 4 years. Now I'm a logistical transportation manager. I live in the Arctic. And I've been here for 7 years, came from Central Ontario. And there's no nuance anymore. So I want to get out and have discussions with people and actually talk about nuanced positions and how people can respect other people and still live their lives and not enforce shit on everyone else.
Right. So what perspective though, initially, what perspective, and I know it's like I say, we're probably not going to be as clear cut or as black and white, but do you have a particular position right now? Like, would you say if someone boxed you in a corner, would you say you're pro-life, pro-choice? What would you say initially, or at least on the surface? We're going to get below that obviously, but what perspective are you going to be taking today?
I would say by default, I'm pro every life.
Oh,
as an, and I don't call myself a Christian or anything like that. I consider myself spiritual, but I don't subscribe to organized religion or anything like that. But to me, every life does matter. And there may be circumstances where, same in adult life, self-defense necessitates the ending of another life, these types of things. There are, I think, valid reasons for it. But I think the default in every person should be a right to life. Right. That's just me.
Excellent. So I'm glad to hear that. So are you both you gentlemen okay with me starting with this Malice 911 question here? Let me just bring it up on the screen. What's to discuss? It's murder, plain and simple. How women can feel empowered by the right to kill their own babies is beyond me. Oh, well, we live in interesting times. So if either one of you gentlemen want to just take off and maybe answer just based on your own perspective, maybe bring a little bit of nuance to that statement and maybe give Malice something in terms of reply.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I would agree with the idea that it is murder, plain and simple. And so in that sense, it should be rather clear cut, at least from the ethics. I think where it gets complicated is how we talk about the legal approach, right? So I'm very firm on the stance that abortion is unethical and that it's wrong. But then I think where the nuance comes in is when we say, okay, in light of the fact that it's wrong, do we have laws against this? What kind of laws do we want to have against this? How are they going to be enforced? Do we really want to be throwing people in jail for 20 years because they had an abortion? Is that really the best way to support families, to build communities? So I agree it's murder, plain and simple. But I think from the legal perspective, that's where there might be a little bit more nuance.
Right. Actually, and before John chimes in, I just want to point out, because that's actually the point of this conversation and why we're doing it on a libertarian channel, is because this is as it pertains to government. Obviously, if people just have personal preferences or opinions or perspectives, that's fine. And as a libertarian, that's literally, it's not up to me to tell other people how to live. But what we're really talking about or discussing today is how abortion pertains to the state, and what, like you say, is how should it be legislated and prevented to be allowed and all. And that's the nuance that we're trying to get to today. So great of you to point that out. So go ahead there, John.
So I would largely agree with Patrick's stance. However, in my understanding in Canada, there is no law on abortion, right? The Supreme Court struck it down.
Yeah,
I think that's perfect. I have my opinions. Patrick has his opinions. The woman who's pregnant will have her opinions. But what we can't discern in saying every situation is the same is let's just throw out incest. Let's just throw this out there. So there was an obvious violation of someone's rights to begin with. Does that necessarily require them to support other rights as that goes on as a result of that. And I don't necessarily agree with that. Thinking, gang rapes and, stuff like that, right? The things that we would lock people up for 20 years, right? In my estimation, though, in today's day and age, if the woman and the man, and even some people debate that, can find a doctor who ethically and morally will provide that service, then to me, that's the ultimate libertarian view.
Right.
Yeah.
Right? No laws at all, period.
If you want to actually reply there, Patrick, go right ahead.
Yeah. So my question to you would be, would you also agree that there shouldn't be laws against murder of adults?
Absolutely not. But again, there are times when murder is absolutely 100% justified.
Okay. So why would you make a distinction between the legal approach to normal murder and the legal approach to abortion?
Because it has to do with circumstances.
Okay.
I don't know how else to define that. But if I walked into a situation, we can even, based on that, we can take a look at the Kyle Rittenhouse situation. So there's a lot of perspective going on there. Is it murder? Is it not murder? Mm-hmm. It depends on the evidence. It depends on the perspective.
Actually, I just wanted to bring in, but you obviously did acknowledge that, John, is because Patrick used the term murder, right? So that's the thing, is because murder comes with its own connotations and the underlying what that means or what that entails, right? So that is the issue of contention, I would say, in this conversation between you gentlemen, is if we're going to describe it as murder, this is the part that I think really gets to the meat of the bone of what it is. Is it murder though? Is it, or as I'm sure John, or if you want to go ahead, actually just rather than me speak for you, just go ahead. So because he basically suggesting that murder, not just taking another human life, right?
So what I would say is that there is gray areas there. People have the right to protect their own bodies and what happens with that, but at the same time, we have the obligation to protect life. So there is there's a balance to be had there that I just don't think law is actually capable of enforcing or providing. But
you do think the law is capable of protecting adults? Like you do support laws against the murder of adults or the killing of adults, of innocent adults?
So I see those as two separate statements.
Okay.
Yes, I see the intentional killing of another adult as criminally wrong, but do I believe the law protects everyone against that? Absolutely not.
Sure. So I guess my question is kind of like, where do you draw the line? Like at what point should there be a legal standard versus it should be left up to choice? Should it be like at the point of birth, heartbeat? Where's that line that you draw between when the law should step in and where the law should be silent?
Specifically on abortion, I don't. I think it should come down to the medical ethics behind whoever's providing that service.
Okay, so it sounds, yeah.
Sorry,
sounds like
just
you're drawing the line at birth.
I don't think the law should ever dictate medical ethics. There are groups out there that are dealing with medical ethics and licensure and all that sort of stuff, and I think it's best left there, period.
Okay. So let's say that there's a woman who has a 3-month-old baby, was born 3 months ago, and she says, as a matter of ethics, for whatever reason, I don't want to have this child. Should she be allowed, or should the law step in to stop her from killing her child?
The law? No.
Of a 3-month-old.
A live 3-month-old?
Yes.
Okay, so there was a case like that in Saskatchewan, I believe, and it was actually an 18-year-old. It was a mercy killing by his father, her father, sorry. Mm-hmm. So we can definitely cross lines here into what is actual ethically right from a sense of mercy killings. What are we calling them now in Canada? Medical suicide. Not honor killings. No. Medically assisted suicides. Right. Where I believe that if the person wants to end their life because they're looking at a long time, suffrage, then absolutely they should have that choice if the medical profession ethically agrees to perform that service for them.
Right.
And that's where I separate that and abortion from actual willful murder of another person. Now, a 3-month living kid, absolutely, that would be murder to me.
And there should be laws against it?
They are a citizen covered by laws. Yes.
Okay. What
See, and
about?
I think there's two issues there.
Sure.
There's citizenry, because you have to be a citizen of a country to be covered by the laws of that country. But then there's morals and ethics behind what we actually do to people.
Right.
I think those are two totally different conversations.
Okay. Okay. So you would say that there should be citizenship and legal protection for a 3-month-old.
Absolutely.
Sure. What about an infant who is 1 day old?
At birth.
At birth. Okay.
At birth.
So then the question is, like, what about a partial birth abortion? Are you familiar with that practice? Basically, the baby's halfway out, and then they kill it. Would that be something that should be legally protected, or the law should stay silent? Because I'm trying to nail down precisely where you draw the line, because in my mind, it's a difference of degree. And so I don't think you can draw a line. And so I'm curious, like, exactly, like, how far down the birth canal? At what point does it become something that suddenly the law should be involved, whereas a second earlier, oh no, it's completely her choice?
And that's I see where you're going. That's a very interesting discussion. We have to differentiate the law and what its intent is from, again, the morals and ethics behind that. Sorry,
Sure.
I have a scheduled hardware scan. Give me a second here. 4 hours will be good. So as far as the law is concerned, with things like citizenship and benefits and rights, to me, when that person becomes a separate person,
Okay.
the moment that kid leaves the birth canal and cut from its mother, it is now a separate entity.
Okay.
Whereas before, I'll grant, it is a mix mash.
Okay.
Like you said, where down the birth canal does that kind of change?
Yeah. I would contest that. The fetus would have completely unique DNA. So arguably, it's already a separate entity, even while it's in the womb. It is its own life with its own head, heart, heartbeat, limbs.
But it is.
It's
but
connected.
At some point, it is completely dependent.
Yes. Okay. So we can talk about dependence. A 1 day old is also completely dependent on its mother, or at least some social framework.
On somebody, not its mother.
Mm-hmm.
There's a difference to me there.
Okay. So there is a difference in the degree of dependence. I agree with that. Does a difference in the degree of dependence have any morally relevant bearing on whether it's wrong or how the law should treat it?
Morally or legally are different questions again. Morally, I would agree with you. Legally, to me, is totally different.
Okay.
To me, we're having the same. To me, we're having the same discussion as the RCMP helping illegal immigrants across the border and them getting full access as citizens in this country. To me, it's the same kind of legal question. Legal, to me, it has nothing to do with morals and ethics.
Okay. So maybe
otherwise we wouldn't have government,
right? Perhaps we should step back then. I think that to a certain extent, laws should reflect morality. Otherwise, what's the point of having a law? Like, can you name a law that is not grounded in some moral principle or argument?
So laws reflect the current morality of the society, or try to.
Right.
The laws that we actually have that reflect morals, believe it or not, go back to Christian history.
Yes.
Abortion was not part of Christian history. I mean, as a moralistic imperative, right?
Mm-hmm. So I guess my question would be, what should the laws reflect? Should the laws reflect our moral principles, or I would argue they should.
And I would argue that's a completely theoretical discussion.
Okay.
What the laws should do and what they do and what they effectively do are totally different things.
Sure. But ideally, we want to move towards what they should do, right?
Yeah, but I don't think that's possible.
Okay. Why not?
Which is why I'd like the law to stay out of personal issues like that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Perhaps here I can articulate a little bit of my perspective on this, because it is a little bit different. Because I very much hear you on the idea that, like, I don't want the federal government meddling in my business, my choices, my medical ethics. I think that that's such a very dangerous precedent, and I'm not a fan of that, right? And there's this libertarian drive in me that says I don't want the government to do anything, let alone regulate people's choices. So I hear that. So I'm an ANCAP, voluntarist, anarcho-capitalist, and so the society that I kind of envision as being ideal is one where there's thousands of communities that each have their own codes of conduct and rules, and are sort of self-governing based on private property rights and contractual arrangements. And so I think that laws or codes of conduct, whatever we want to call them, should reflect the morals of society. But I also would say that those shouldn't be on a federal or global level, but it would be preferable to have those on a local level. So this is where I kind of have a very unique take, in that on the one hand, I want to live in a society with laws against abortion, but I want that society to be localized and voluntary and contractual. And so it's yeah.
So let me just kind of push back here for a second. So what I just got based on what you said was you're not okay with abortion, but you're okay with a city level killing kids as long as it's not on a national level.
I wouldn't say I'm okay with it.
Let me just throw this out there, Patrick, just kind of tell you where I'm coming from. I am a theoretical ANCAP, but practical minarchist, because I don't believe that because of human nature, we will ever get rid of government. I don't think it's possible.
Okay.
So from that aspect, we need to acknowledge that even in the ANCAP model, you're allowing those individual little places to set their own rules.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and then the question becomes, well, if there is a society that is allowing killing or murder, then theoretically you would be justified in defending people from their aggressors, even in an ANCAP society. And so the argument could be made that one ANCAP community could go violently or like use force defensively on behalf of the unborn who are being aggressed against. It becomes nuanced, but I don't think that an ANCAP society precludes the use of force in defense of innocents, even if they are in a separate community.
So that almost sounds to me like the way the United States uses the U.S. Marine Corps right now.
Okay.
As an expeditionary military. And defending everything based on, well, they're being oppressed, so we need to spread democracy.
Right, which is...
How is that stance any different?
I think because the U.S. Marine Corps is not justified in a lot of what they do. So it would have to be up to each individual whether they believe that their actions are justified and truly in a purely self-defensive manner. But
they largely think they are.
They think they are, and I would disagree.
So, but that's kind of my point. You're disagreeing. So you in ANCAP City A disagree with the people in ANCAP City B. You're saying it's okay to go out and wipe them all out defensively?
I think that you could justify that based on the non-aggression principle.
Then I think you can justify Iraq based on the non-aggression principle.
I would say no, because the funds that are used for the war in Iraq are taken from taxation, and so that's just as aggressive as whatever they claim to be stopping.
So if you voluntarily go grab your rifle and go kill the people in ANCAP City B because they're committing abortion, you're okay with that as long as it's voluntary?
I think that would be more justifiable.
Okay, and I think we're in a position where moral A and moral B can be equally as moral depending on what the perception is. Which is why I think laws need to stay out of it.
Just before you two continue on this, actually, this is great. And thanks for you guys both. And you're both taking great stances and definitely doing the pushback, which is what I was hoped. And hopefully the people that are watching the stream will see that this is the point here. It's not as simple. It's not quite as black and white, as I was saying to Mr. Malice 911 early on. It sounds easy. And even from Patrick's perspective, obviously he's taken a perspective that he has kind of drawn that line. But as we're seeing based on the pushback from John, that it shows that Patrick's willing to kind of forego his own morality based on his preference and which one should live or die as well. So once again, I would just say to both Patrick and John, neither one of these gentlemen, I would anyone that's watching, neither one of these gentlemen want anyone's lives to be taken needlessly. But this is the whole point of having this kind of discussion when you're talking about the abortion issue and why, justices of the Supreme Court, politicians, the Catholic Church, Protestant, Christianity in general, or just people just trying to think and figure how do you fix this issue? This is why it's been going on this long, and which is why people, even conservatives that are chomping at the bit and hoping that Trump will, put Amy on the Supreme Court, they want to revisit this because they believe that the pendulum swung way too far into just allowing too much of just this excess, and they recognize that it's not just the legal aspect, but it's the moral implications of saying, oh yeah, that's okay. So obviously, just like John, I would say there's areas where I thought, you can use the rape thing, you can use the incest thing, you can use the fact that someone's got a medical condition, and if the child is born, that maybe the mother dies. There's all kinds of situations or scenarios that you can conjure up, or it actually happen in real life, where it makes that decision, and of course, based on the person themselves that's actually having to go through it, is going to change up their own, even Christian, fundamentalist Christians I've known my own life that have made the decision to have an abortion. Why? Because it was something that, like I say, might have affected the health of that woman, right? That might have been something that could have caused them to suffer long-term protracted injury to herself, or even potentially die. So this is why this debate, this kind of conversation, is contentious, and why I just, like I said early on, it's not quite that black and white. And thank you for both of you guys for putting forward both your perspectives, because what I'm seeing is you're both concerned. The only thing I will add before I let you guys continue on is I wish we had a lady actually into this conversation that we could have brought on today. I was really hoping that someone from the female persuasion might have joined, because that would have been another area where it wasn't just a bunch of guys here talking about abortion. Absolutely. But once again, I at least recognize that even though all three of us are men, obviously, we have care and compassion for human lives, whether they're small or as a child, infant, or a fetus, or an adult. So like I say, thanks for you guys doing this, and go ahead back on your conversation there, because I'm really enjoying it, and hopefully the people in the chat are as well.
Has Facebook not shut this down yet? Because I didn't think three guys were allowed to discuss abortion.
Right.
Sorry.
Yeah. No, I'm really, actually, yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
I'm really enjoying this discussion. So,
good.
Yeah.
Thanks. Me too. So I actually had a very long and intensely Scotch-driven conversation with a female friend of mine, who, and her position was that it's not even the man's choice. Her choice, her body, her everything. Get the fuck out of my life. Mm. And while I can understand that, and that can be good for some people's morals, for me, there are more people in the conversation. So I also don't think, something that you said, Bennett, was that, some people just wish that the law would fix this. Well, I don't think it can be. I don't think we can write one law that will fix. I mean, government has never fixed anything to begin with, but moral questions like this, there's never one answer. Can't be. So there's always a little bit of gray area that needs to be allocated to the individual. And if you're okay making that choice and staring at yourself in the mirror, then who am I to say no?
So this is where I think I'd like to push a little more on what I see as an inconsistency between your treatment of abortion and your treatment of murder. You're very big on, we should get the federal government out of abortion, and there shouldn't be an abortion law. But then you also say that there should be murder laws. And so I would say, I think the same reasoning and argumentation that you use to argue against a federal law on abortion, I think could also be used to argue against a federal law against murder, because to me, it's the same argumentation, it's the same situation. There are differences in degree in terms of the size of the person being killed, the degree of dependence, the level of development, and the environment that they're in, but I don't see those as being morally relevant. And so my question for you would be, in light of your position on the government should just stay out of the abortion issue, why would you not also say that the government should stay out of murder in general?
So two things on that specifically. Number one, there are moral exceptions in the murder code.
Yep. Okay, sure.
For self-defense. And we're seeing issues with this in Canada, where Canadians don't have the ethical right to defend themselves. And that's a problem. Yeah. As far as the actual, definition of murder, laws apply to people that the state controls, period. Mm-hmm. So if I could shoot an arrow across the world and kill somebody in another country, what the hell would you do about that?
you'd start a war if you want.
Right? But really, there is nothing you can do under your code of murder, even if it is willful murder.
Mhm.
So at some point, the law, and I'm not justifying abortion or murder or anything like that. All I'm saying is at some point, the law stops.
Right.
It has to. It can't cover everything.
Mm-hmm. But I'm saying why stop that between abortion and murder? If they are ethically the same, then shouldn't our legal disposition also be the same?
Theoretically, yes, but again, I just don't think it's practical. I think society has evolved with these Christian morals, which is where the non-aggression stuff comes from.
Yep.
And yes, we can push it morally into places the law does not cover.
Mm-hmm.
But those laws were developed based on the people in the kingdom.
Mm-hmm.
And if the king didn't have to feed that person, then that law did not apply, and the king didn't care. So we have to understand how these things developed in order to understand where we're at today. Does that?
Yeah, for sure.
Make sense?
Yeah, and I guess I'm just trying to think of like as a moral ought in the ideal utopian future, is there a role for a federal government in creating laws around killing, and what ideally should that be, and why should that approach be any different than abortion? So,
as a carte blanche rule, rules against murder are good. Now, I also don't think that having what did Patty had you do again? She was a journalist. What the hell did she do before she became a politician? Nothing important. Anyways, why should she be involved in making abortion laws on nuanced moral discussions?
Why should she be involved in murder laws on nuanced moral discussions?
Because murder laws don't have a nuanced real moral. I mean, they do from an aspect of self-defense, but the basic concept has been around for centuries, since man has existed. So what I would argue is that the libertarian perspective, much like let's not create unburdensome safety laws everywhere, let's use industry groups, industry best practice to decide that and decide what is best for that industry. I don't see the abortion industry as much any different, where we already have medical professions, where through the training and the licensure and their discussions, they determine, one doctor doesn't agree with another doctor all the time, but they're not going to throw their license under a bus and say you were wrong. You had a different perspective, that's fine. But within this big general moral tent, we have to hash this out. And I think those people are the best people to have those discussions, not politicians.
Right. Yeah. So it sounds like you're saying that because murder is largely condemned as wrong by the majority of the population, however that's defined, it's okay to have laws there because it's not debatable or it's not debated. Whereas because abortion's a more gray territory, like it sounds like you're basically appealing to a majority or a historical norm to say, well, most people agree with this, or there aren't as many gray areas in my perspective, and therefore it's okay to have this law. But since people disagree with abortion, to me, that's not a principled approach to why laws should be in place or what laws should be in place.
But laws are historical norms.
Right. But
the majority of our laws, that's a different discussion. And that's a discussion
that's the question I'm
but
asking.
that's a discussion of libertarianism, where the more laws, the worse, not the better.
Well, could I just interject and say,
Please.
let me just paint a scenario here real quick, and you both you gentlemen take whatever perspective you want to offer up, but also keeping in mind the ethical and the legal implication. And even though all of us, I would suggest, are, whether you identify as ANCAP voluntarist or a philosophical libertarian like myself, is yes, we're not believers, right? We're not beholden to any particular ideologies or dogmas. Is we're trying to think critically about these issues, and this is one of those issues that's obviously a very difficult one and very contentious, as I was saying. But let's set up the scenario, because most people, this is what they're imagining in their minds. Typically, when you're talking about the abortion debate, is the old scenario, and there's lots of them, but I'll just draw from one for now. Let's say, like I say, kind of like what I was suggesting earlier, right? So you got a woman that let's get into the third trimester, so late stage abortions, right? And obviously once you've gotten past the 6 month point, right, the first and second trimester, me personally, and this is just my subjective opinion, not saying that this is grounded in anything, like I say, that's 100% provable. I haven't figured this entirely in my mind, but I personally, off the top of my head, I think third trimester, we know there is a state. Now, absent of a state, how could this happen and take fold? We can hypothetically use those hypothetical situations, but we have to deal with the real world we're living in. And because we do recognize that Roe versus Wade may very well, depend on how things may be revisited, and that's definitely going to have implications for even other countries and like Canada as well. So you got this, like I say, this third stage abortion. Off the top of my head, initial thoughts, and I think most people kind of take this perspective, most reasonable people anyways, is if there's going to be an exception and you're going to take that child, because I'd say after the second trimester, you're talking about a child that's viable. And that definitely takes place. You see that at that point in time, they're viable. You can remove them from the womb and they can be placed, whether they need incubators or whatever, but they can sustain life with some assistance and some maybe even without or minimal assistance. Now, the exception obviously to that off the top of my head would be what if it's a potential threat to the mother's life in some way? Or can incapacitate her for some extended period of time for some reason. Where do you draw the ethical and legal line when you're talking about that? Like I say, let's just use the third trimester, late stage abortion.
Mm-hmm. I would say if there's a threat to the mother's life, then I think that's a different scenario, where that would be one of the rare scenarios where an abortion would potentially be justifiable, because you have to choose between saving one life and potentially losing both. And so that's like a one rare exception, because in that case, if the whole point of the pro-life position is valuing the sanctity of life. And so that would be the best way to value the sanctity of life. Now, from a strict non-aggression perspective, you could argue that, but that would be where I stand.
Okay. So just out of curiosity, Patrick, why would you not opt for a C-section and see if the baby could survive? Why would you not force that on the mother if it's a third term?
I would certainly say that would be preferable.
But would you write that into law?
In the laws of the voluntary community that I'm a part of.
So here's the problem, because we're at a point where if you want to write a law like that, now we have to start writing exceptions. And you have to have exception A, exception B, exception C, and if exception D isn't written yet, well, it sucks to be you. And I just don't agree with that enforcing of things on other people. I understand your position, and I largely agree with your position, just so we're clear on this.
Yeah, and I think you do. Yeah.
What I disagree with is the legal application.
Right.
And I think we're in an ideal situation right now where mom and dad and doctor get to talk. And that's as far as the government's involved, period. And if the doctor can keep their license doing this, then that's up to them and their medical ethics and their discretion.
Let me just say one more thing there, guys, before you respond there, Patrick, too, is this is one of the area, and Patrick has basically owned up that there is some gray area already here that you can see, because you have obviously had made the exception, which once again, not a catchy moment. That's just a simple fact that because you're using your own internal logic and your consistency in your thinking and the non-aggression principle, and recognizing that this is an almost impossible scenario. So just like John and I think we'll all come away from this, even after this conversation taking place, is I don't think, especially when you're talking about government or the state, where there can be anything where you can write something in the law without the caveats or exceptions for particular circumstances. And then that does get in the gray area. Exactly. But at least as far as I'm concerned, as much as I'm not a fan of government, but if there are laws to protect life, then there has to be a protection of the unborn life as well. But it can't be, like I say, just drawn along those black and white lines to the point where now you're causing, because we all know the intended or unintended consequences of trying to universalize something, especially when you're talking abortion, when there's so many exceptions and outliers, that's going to require leeway and some kind of freedom there to, maybe move the goalposts a little bit, depending on the particular circumstances. Now, what I always said, and I'll just say this, and you guys get and respond, and maybe you can even respond to actually what I'm bringing to it, is the most important thing for me as a father when I'm thinking about these issues. And I don't have a daughter, unfortunately, but if I did, I just can't help but think because this is such a profound, discussion, debate, and it has such profound implications, not just for the mother and the child, but even the father, extended family members. It's going to be devastating for all people involved under those kind of scenarios. Is the most important and vital thing that I would fall back on as a parent or as anyone that's a leader in any society is creating a culture that's more proactive to prevent such a things from occurring, where you have, and doesn't mean it's going to be
absolutely
perfected, but to prevent as many possible situations or scenarios. Raise your children in a manner so that these are going to be something that you're not going to have to deal with. Most human beings shouldn't have to deal with this. Some people will have to. There's no way we're going to perfect society, prevent rapes from happening in other scenarios. But as a parent, the onus is on you and the people in your community and other members, is to solidify and reinforce the importance of, I don't care if it's abstinence or practicing safe sex or just, if you put yourself in dangerous scenarios, like, being responsible drinkers, as a woman, like how many times do we hear they go out, they, get out of their mind and, have sexual encounters with people. And so I think that's the biggest thing that I think we should bring to the table. And I think you both gentlemen would agree with that, is the importance here, which is why we can't rely on the state to do to be the final arbiter for this kind of situation or scenario, because they'll make mistakes along the way and cause harm to either mother or the unborn child. Is to be proactive as a parent and community members or community leaders, and making sure we're raising children, not placing themselves in those positions as best we can.
Absolutely. So, sorry if I can just throw in, there was a study that came out of Florida, I think it was last year, that said up to 97% of abortions were completely elective procedures. It had to do with lifestyle and career choices and this type of thing. So this is actually something that I've been looking at in the more recent past with all this COVID fucking craziness that's gone on. But with the downfall of religion in the 60s and going into the 70s, you've seen a sharp increase in government, right? And I think that and then you have the Roe versus Wade decision, which, I mean, obviously Planned Parenthood have killed more people than white cops kill, or black people kill black people, whatever you want to say. But that has to do with a loosening of that religious morality in my mind. And again, I am not religious, like organized. But the fact that we're losing that and placing these decisions on government is just fucking dangerous.
Yeah.
Right. They're like, just because I agree that Roe versus Wade was bad, it should probably be repealed. That doesn't mean I necessarily agree with late term abortions. The two totally different kind of concepts there. Right. And that's what we need to figure out, is, do we even have that law?
Yeah, no, you guys are making some.
And how do we get back to that? How do we get back to that spirituality of the sanctity of life? Period.
Yeah, absolutely. Strong communities are really important to addressing this, right? And I think that is one area where I would perhaps fault social conservatives. Is I feel like they emphasize too much reliance on, we need a law, let's get the legal system right. I think there should be a lot more emphasis on, how can we build strong communities? How can we fund pregnancy care centers? How can we support families so that women don't feel like they need to choose an abortion? And so I think that's definitely a really important argument. And I think as libertarians, we need to be championing that cause of being proactive, being involved, making sure that there are healthy families, healthy relationships, and that we can come alongside people and support them as a means of promoting life. So I totally agree with that. I want to get back to an earlier point that you made about the idea that there's this gray area, right? And like, there's questions about if the mother's life is in danger, then that might be an exception, and there's outliers. And I think that's a really good point, and it does emphasize the fact that there are nuances involved with this discussion, and I totally acknowledge that. I think what's interesting about the fact that there's all these gray areas and all these exceptions and all of these moral questions, I think that is a really good reason why an ANCAP society and an ANCAP legal system would be a much better approach. Because the thing about an ANCAP legal system, the rules themselves are subject to competition.
Right.
That's the way I like to think about it. So you think about in any sort of free market competition, what happens? You have competition, and because you have competition, the cost of the product goes down and the quality goes up. Over time, we see innovation, we see development, we see technological improvement. We see that the really good products, the really good businesses thrive and are profitable and make more money. We see that the weak businesses, the inefficient businesses take losses and are eventually weeded out. And so what I would say as an ANCAP is, what if we applied the same principles of competition to the legal system? So we could have thousands of competing legal systems, this polycentric legal system idea. And so what would happen is that the rules are subject to competition. So societies that establish good rules that make sense, that are easy to enforce, that properly address the exceptional circumstances, those sorts of rules will be promulgated and will become more widespread. Societies that create bad rules or rules that just don't work or don't agree with people will eventually be weeded out. And I think if that happens, what we would see is a tendency towards, yes, rules against abortion, but those would occur not because it would be a top-down federal legislation, but I think there would be a bottom-up understanding of these are the rules that make the most sense. And then because of that, they will eventually dominate the rest of the competition. And we will see widespread restrictions on abortion, just from a different starting point.
Right. You got no sound, John.
Sorry, because I coughed. I'm still on mute. And I would 100% agree with that. In that was my comment on the laws that we started with as a society are based on religion, right? It was that ground up swell. So I agree with you. However, I will take you back to your comment about one ANCAP society self-defending people in another ANCAP society violently. How do you rectify that with what you just said about if abortion is bad and society from the ground up decides abortion is bad, then the whatever ANCAP societies that believe in that will eventually die off? How would you justify proactively going in and attacking that ANCAP society based on that evaluation?
Yeah, that's a good question. And it would really come down to the morals of individuals and societies, whether they think that that is a justifiable or preferable. So what I'm saying is you could justify that from a pure non-aggression standpoint, because you're technically defending the lives of innocents, right? So you are not violating aggression because you're acting in self-defense on behalf of another. With that said, just because you can justify it from a non-aggression principle standpoint doesn't mean that it's the best course of action. So for example, another course of action would be that a society would pool their resources and offer to pay another society to have certain laws. And so in that sense, there could be a market for, this is kind of how ANCAP society would approach zoning laws as well, is you can say, hey, we think that we would prefer for you to have laws against abortion. We aren't at the point where we want to come in and violently stop you, but we will offer to pay you. Or maybe we will make an exchange in some other form where we will adopt some laws that you think are good if you adopt some laws that we think are good. So I think there could be some arrangements there. Or you could just take the pacifist position, which is what I tend to lean towards, which is I will argue, I will debate, I will try to convince people, but just say, you know what, I don't think violence for me is an option that I'm willing to pursue, even though it might be justifiable.
Okay, so I have a big problem with what you just said.
Okay.
And to me, what you just said sounds like politics. You go to a foreign country and you say, hey, we don't like what you're doing here, so if you change this, we'll pay you. And if you don't, we don't like it enough, we're just going to send it in the Marines and we'll do what we do anyways.
I think the difference is, it's not on a national scale. So the thing with a national scale is it obscures all the individuals, right? And so this one government pretends to act on behalf of 300 million people, when in reality, there's 50 million people that actually support what they're doing. So that would be the first thing, is this would be individual people, private militias, and so it wouldn't be broad-based. The other thing is to remember that this isn't trying to bully another country or another community into submission. This is trying to specifically stand up for the rights of innocents. So it would be just the same as if there's a genocide happening in another country and we going in and saying, we're not okay with this, and perhaps we're even going to violently interfere to stop this genocide, right? So it's not about bullying other countries. It's about defending the lives of innocents who who are being killed in other countries.
Okay, so my question to that would be, define innocence. Do we invade Pakistan for throwing gays off roofs? Do we invade Saudi for masking women? Do we, much like abortion, where do you draw that line between the moral ability to go wipe out another society and saying, you know, that's their choice and they should be allowed to do that?
And I hear you, and that is a gray area that each individual is going to have to decide what they are personally willing to either do themselves or to fund in terms of what level of force they would like to have to protect and defend these innocents. It's interesting that the way you frame the question is, should we do this? Should we do this? And I'm very sensitive to collectivist thinking, not that I'm accusing you of that, but the question, should we do this, comes out of a nationalistic, patriotic framework that basically says we as a country act as one entity, and the government basically makes all our decisions and uses all our tax money to do things, some of which we might support and some of which we might not support. I think from a libertarian perspective, the question needs to be, do I want to support this? Do I want to fund this? And if each individual can make those decisions, yeah, we might see some militia groups go in and try to defend innocents who are being thrown off buildings or whatever, but it wouldn't be collectivist. And I think, therefore, it would be a lot more efficient. It would be a lot more sensible in the way it's executed. And I think there would be a lot more room for bargaining and coming to more peaceable arrangements than just the government saying, we're just going to force everything.
Okay. So the one thing I would so first of all, I was a soldier, right?
Right.
So what I was saying when I say we is West versus East, because that's where a lot of these moralistic kind of issues really come out. But I love this comment by Rika, the hopeful voluntarist. The dude talking about making a bunch of laws doesn't like collectivism. So even in your ANCAP municipalities, those laws will only represent 80% of the population. It's Pareto's law. It doesn't matter how small you make that. Until you go to the individual cannot be fully represented. So I don't care how small you make the government, it will only represent 80% of the population, just theoretically based on Pareto's law.
An ANCAP society would not be a government, it would be contractual. And so 100% of the people living in a society would give complete explicit agreement to all of the laws they live under. So it's based on individual property rights, and the only laws that would, maybe laws isn't even the wrong word. I'm using the word laws colloquially, but it's really codes of conduct or rules. Just like a school would have a code of conduct, a church would have rules about what their members are supposed to do. It's a completely voluntary contractual society that is based on individual explicit consent to rules. And so I think that's the complete antithesis of collectivism.
So I think in the immediate near term, that is not correct in the fact that you still need to vote with your feet, if that makes sense. The idea of the ANCAP society is that if you don't like it, you move to one you prefer. Until I can do that, I still have to follow those codes of conduct.
You only have to follow the codes of conduct that are imposed by the private property owner. The owner of the private property gets to decide what rules will be enforced on their property. And so if you own your own property, then you don't have to sign any contracts you don't want to agree with. Eventually, societies would probably form where if you bought a property in a neighborhood, then one condition of the sale of the property would be that you sign on to a set of rules. And so, yes, there is a voting with your feet, but it doesn't violate individual property rights.
As long as I want to sell my property and go somewhere else. So going back to what you were saying about the abortion stuff, is you would have one community with one certain set of laws, asking another community to change their laws. So why can't those people just move out if they don't want that? And if someone in your community wants abortion and they need to move to do that, well, they can't necessarily always just up and pick up and leave. That's the whole idea of the retail dogma, is that you don't make enough money to actually have a choice of where you work. The same thing can, if it was my choice right now, I probably wouldn't be living in this country, but that's not my choice right now. I don't have the money to just pick up and go to Costa Rica or somewhere else. So that's where I think that's where I'm a theoretical ANCAP, but a practical minarchist. I don't think we'll ever get there. We can never get rid of government. Because like you just said, someone needs to make those agreed upon rules. And while I agree with the ANCAP model, and I think it's possible, human nature says no.
Yeah, I mean, so a lot of the same arguments were made against the abolitionists a couple hundred years ago, and they said slavery is an innate feature of human nature. It's never going away. We can try to make it nicer. We can try to get masters to treat their slaves a little bit nicer, but we just have to accept the fact that slavery is just a given. It's been universal. It's been worldwide, and therefore it's impossible to completely abolish. And I think the past 200 years have shown that actually those arguments were wrong, and we have, obviously we're not there yet. And I would consider statism as a form of slavery. But I think we've seen dramatic, unprecedented, and largely unexpected progress in the past 2 centuries, where society has become more free, markets have become more free, people have become more free. There's a lot more access to movement with things like technology, planes, cars, etc. And so I think it's difficult for a lot of people to see an ANCAP future because we don't live in one, and we see a lot of corruption and negative morals. And yet, if you think about just a person day to day, most people live by the principle of, I'm not going to initiate violence against peaceful people. I'm not going to go over to my neighbor's house and violently force my ideas and opinions onto them. Most people already live a very ANCAP morality in their day-to-day lives. And so I think if people would just recognize the inconsistency between their political philosophy and their personal morality, I think we could see a transition to an ANCAP society. And I am hopeful that it would not only be possible, but far preferable, and I think quite likely.
Actually, before you reply there, John, if you don't mind, can I just say something real quick? Because actually, this is something I've run through my own mind, and what Patrick brought up actually just brought that right to the front of my mind once again is, and I've even said this too, so I'm not saying anything bad about you, Patrick. I've said the same thing myself, and then afterwards, after I've thought about it for a minute, it's like, shit, actually, that's not really a correct statement if you think about it, critically and logically. Is we all say this, and I even, when I go out in public and I deal with people, like you say, we all do seemingly deal with each other on a voluntary basis. So as you suggest, and I've said this before, like I said many times, we mostly function under the non-aggression principle. But do we really? Or are we just liking to tell ourselves that? Now, for me, I really do. I don't believe in the state. I don't try to delegate any authority that I don't have to anyone. But I would say most of our peers actually, they're not doing the harm themselves. They're delegating. So are most people ANCAPs? Maybe there's a little push back to that you could offer too. Or is it that they pretend that they're ANCAPs, but they're just, or they go through their daily lives looking like they're ANCAPs, but they're just offloading or delegating the responsibility to do the theft or to control their neighbors onto something they call government, right? So are they really benevolent and moral because they're not themselves doing it? Because I would suggest, even if I don't steal from my neighbor, if I get someone else to go do it for me, am I really claiming morality or being, taking that stance? I don't know. That's maybe something else to deal with in another discussion, but that is something that we have to kind of acknowledge. Is most of us, I would say you, and based on our conversation so far, I would say Patrick and John and myself, we are the people that you could say don't want to delegate these kind of things. But most of the people in our country, this is the part that makes these conversations a little uncomfortable, is do they really adhere to the non-aggression principle? Even though when we go out there physically, we don't see them doing harm to each other, but they are. It's just they're arbitrating that authority or delegating that authority to someone else to do it on their behalf.
So that's really interesting, because one of my past careers was a loss prevention guy. And the statistic there was that if you brought 10 people into a room, put $100 bill on the table and turn the lights off, there's an 80% chance that bill would be gone by the time you turn that light back on. So while we have largely erased slavery and all this sort of stuff, let's not forget what it took to get there, and the fact that we actually haven't erased slavery. People still enslave other people. And by the way, the abolitionists were right in that human beings enslaved their own kind first because they could. So even in our voluntary society, there are people who will allow themselves to be taken advantage of, whether it's monetarily or physically. And as you said, with certain structures, that is in self slavery, like statism. But you could say the same thing to, Walmart, who, doesn't pay enough people to get anywhere, or any of these types of things. To me, it's the same kind of thing. Now, we also have to remember that the US is really the one that brought about the end of slavery, but they didn't, in a way. I mean, the Civil War wasn't fought over slavery. It was fought over the fact that the North wanted to impose their views on the South. Slavery was a large trigger, but it could be better called the War for Independence, not not the U.S. Civil War.
Right.
It was the right for the South to secede from this large state. So it wasn't. A lot of people think it was fought over slavery. It wasn't. But the fact that they wrote in the U.S. Constitution that all men are created equal was the first time in human history, really, that had been codified, and that's what caused all that problem. So yes, you can say, you know, every life is precious, and we can have no abortion. But just think about what you're going to do going forward from that. And are you actually going to solve the problem? And I would largely say no. You're going to cause a lot of life lost. You're going to cause wars. You're going to go back to the dark ages where people are fighting over these concepts. And at the end of the day, you're not going to stop it because it's an individual choice.
Right. Okay. I would disagree with sort of that last part, that that it would lead to a less civilized society. A few comments. One, Larken Rose has a great book called The Most Dangerous Superstition, where he talks about, he talks about statism as a superstition. And I think that's a really good way to think about it. Yes, it's absolutely important to acknowledge that as much as people may live according to non-aggression in their day-to-day lives, they certainly don't vote like it. And so there certainly is that double standard where people maybe are not as benevolent as they might seem in their day-to-day lives, with not going around violently harassing people. That said, I do see statism kind of as a superstition, and in the sense that as much as people currently believe it and adhere to it, I do think we could see a day where that kind of wears off and people kind of come to their senses and say, oh, I am living inconsistently with the morals I'm living at every day. People could come to an economic insight that, oh, free markets are actually really good idea and work better. And as we see, like, economic freedom indexes consistently showing that the most economically free countries are also the most prosperous, and all the rest. So I think that between the economic argument, the moral argument, I mean, the 20th century has so many examples of places where statism has absolutely failed. I think that people are coming to their senses, and as much as they may not currently live out a consistent non-aggression morality, I think that there is an opportunity that they lose that superstition and do sort of stop having that double standard. The other thing I'll point out in that regard is Ludwig von Mises has this great treatise, Human Action, and there's a section in Human Action. I have
30 hours left.
Yeah, I'm 2/3 of the way through.
Wow.
It's long. It's dense.
Yeah, I don't drive enough.
But it's really good, and I've learned a lot from it. And there's this really interesting section in there that he has called Might, and essentially his thesis in that section is that might or power isn't about how many guns you have, or how much ammunition you have, or how many barricades you have, or how much territory you control. It's all about ideology. Might, it comes from people's ideological alignment with whoever is in charge. And the only reason that people have power at all is because other people support them. Other people believe that they should have power, right? The only reason the Hitlers and the Stalins of the world were able to do what they did is because there were millions of others who endorsed and actively supported their cause because they had an ideological alignment with the idea that these people should be in power. And so what's really interesting about that is we don't need to take guns, we don't need to use violence and force, and we don't need to descend back into barbarism to establish a voluntary society. All we need to do is change people's minds. Because if we get a critical mass, say 50% of people, to adopt a voluntarist ideology, then the might of the politicians and all of the megalomaniacs that are controlling us is going to dwindle away, not because it was forced out of them, but simply because the ideologies that were keeping them power in the first place are no longer prevalent and no longer supported.
Yeah. Can I just jump in there, John?
Yep.
So in terms, because you guys have brought up those, and great Mises and Larken Rose, those are actually, it's amazing because I don't attribute enough, but during my intellectual journey of trying to learn all this stuff, or philosophical journey, whatever one of you describe it as, is that actually Larken Rose was one of the people that really was, and not just the superstition, but that video he had of the voting chattel or whatever it was, anyways, I'll put a link to it in this stream after I'm done. Anyways, it was a great video. But in addition to that, I kind of went on watching some of his other stuff. And one of the key points, and you kind of brought it up a little bit, Patrick, there, But even better than the superstition and statism as basically as a religion, as a quasi-religion. But also, did you see the video called the Jones Plantation?
Yes. Yep.
That really makes you think about today, and I've talked about this quite extensively in some of my past streams and videos, is are we really, I mean, most of our fellow peers don't perceive that there's such thing as human ownership, but what is really the difference here? And I kind of even did the mathematical calculations real quick on the fly. Okay, so if full-on human ownership under the slavery that we understood in the past was that the master takes 100% of the labor, the proceeds of labor, but then actually you can destroy the credibility of that or the validity of that claim by just the sheer fact that they obviously had to be clothed, they obviously had to be fed. Your slave's not going to be much good yet if they starve to death, right? So, and you had to, and if you take the Fraser Institute study that's come out over most years, that they come out with it, but now it's become more prevalent where people are referencing it. Whereas Canadians, typically, the typical household, it's what, 42% of your income, your yearly income goes towards those key staples that every human being needs to survive. So a roof over your head, food in your belly, and anything that you need to produce in terms or consume in terms of energy to be productive in any way. And then it's 46% that goes to taxes. So that's basically claim or suggesting that there's, the excess bulk or the majority, the plurality of what you produce in society based on the fruits of your own labor is actually going towards government or your new form of master, and you're getting the minority aspect of it. And then I guess the little bit that's left over is if you take your 46 and 40, what do you got? 10% left over or whatever is left over, right? And that's that little bit of that, I guess, that disposable income that we can buy to keep ourselves consuming these things to keep us distracted from the fact that we're slaves, right? Modern day slaves. But they've what it is the people that want to be our masters or rulers, they're much more powerful in their ads, right? And in their advertising campaigns to suggest, just like with that video, is no, you're free men now. You just get to pick, and you get to pick whether it's Mr. Smith can be replaced with Mr. Jones. And actually all that stuff, when I was watching that video, it's so resonated with what you actually experience in the real life, rather than, and how it contrasts with the, how the political class or people suggest that we are that far away from slavery. How far are we truly away from slavery, right?
We've gone from feudal to super feudal.
Yeah. He's turning that into a movie, by the way.
Oh, that would be awesome. Well, I don't know whatever happened to, he was supposed to come up with a quiz thing, and it was supposed to be interactive. I don't know if you remember.
The Mirror?
I don't know. Yeah, The Mirror.
He's still working on it.
Is he? Yeah, it's been a long time in the making, but that would be great, because I think that's the most important thing, which is why I've even kind of jumped off of his, and I lend credibility to his, where he would ask people questions. And that's where I kind of conjured up my own little thing that I call the 4-question quest for freedom is, can I delegate, all this stuff? And it's those things that have really played a key and pivotal role in my mind. And as much as I've listened to a lot of the philosophers and like Aristotle and Plato, I mean, I just like most of you guys, I spend most of my days like trying to learn as much as humanly possible. But all these things are profound in terms of for people, and the thing that's most important for us, and just like with the abortion issue, is I don't know the answer, you're not going to know the answer, and John's not going, but what we can do, and what I think we are providing today, no matter what topic or subject we're dealing with, and of course abortion being the key one here, is people need to use those critical thinking skills, and you have to deal with these examples, kind of like John, and I think Patrick, you might even agree with this as well, is based on each case or scenario, because we can't create, I just don't know how you can create a situation or scenario where there is a one-size-fits-all approach that'll work, other than those underlying principles. But once again, those are going to be our guiding principles, like the non-aggression principle. But to use them, and once again, I think in conjunction to that, this is why I think it's vitally important, because there are always those gray area nuances, is not to rely on laws, but the meta stories, whether, historically they came from the Bible, right? I gained a lot of my morality, not just from the Bible, even some of those great movies that were put on the airwaves or the big theaters when I was growing up. Because without those underlining meta stories or narratives of people that give them that proper understanding in how it is to be a good person and to adhere to these principles that we think are best suitable for us all. And I think every one of us, we've tested this hypothesis out in our own life, is the better we are to other people, the more respectful we are to each other, the less we use force, violence, and theft towards, the more chance we have at having a peaceful and prosperous society. Once again, doesn't mean it's ever going to be perfected, but that's where, like I say, the culture has to drive home the importance of having these situations, scenarios painted, whether it's, on literally on a screen or on a canvas, so that people can actually think about these issues critically, and rather than listen to politicians or people from the legal profession who are suggesting that it's their way or the highway.
And I think a big problem that you just pointed out, Bennett, is none of those stories that you're talking about are allowed in schools anymore.
Right.
They're all considered offensive. We can't talk about that stuff anymore.
Well, that's the thing. And those stories and other things that I've learned in my life, it's not the laws that are on the book. It's those stories. It's painting the picture of real human beings in real situations, and how difficult it is as human beings who have separated ourselves from nature and trying to construct morality and ethics in a way that's suitable for everybody. It's those stories that allows me, and once again, in having an objective base, that's why I love objectivists, people like Ayn Rand. As much as I love some of those things, that the meta stories from the Bible, there's also these, and being able to balance these things, just like with human beings. We have a brain, right, that's analyzing stuff, but we also have a heart, right? So where we have the compassion side, or if you're talking about the left and right side of the brain, that's that area where, once again, we have to create a culture and a society of people who are willing to try to balance those things and recognize. And I think Patrick and John both acknowledge that and Patrick said, like, the different situations, scenarios, the importance of having people that recognize and adhere to individual liberty is, no scenario Patrick's going to paint or John's going to paint is going to be conducive. And you'll say, okay, I accept everything Patrick said, and you say it. But with that, whether you want to call it a competitive model, and that's the beautiful thing about competition. I use that as an example all the time too, Patrick, is because one thing I do understand when in terms of competition. So if morality and ethics is our goal, competition raises and elevates, which means we're going to get closer. So I'm not talking about competition in terms of I'm going to kick your ass. No, I'm talking about competition in everything in life. Competition, whether you're raising someone, whether you're trying to learn something, it means you're increasing or getting closer to that goal that you want to achieve. And that's actually one area that I'll say that I definitely agree with Patrick, is as much as I don't agree with, like, the situation that you painted where some people should be able to come in and maybe use the militia. I'm not saying that scenario is great in terms of, from my perspective, because I'm thinking about how that unfolds, but I'm saying that is much better, or at least gets us closer to where you can find where those communities or those areas of the globe, and like I say, you will congregate in that freedom of association. Now, just like John's saying, I'm not moving every time you tell me to turn around, or there's something that's, but it does, just like with I'm used to going to a particular store for something, but hey, if another store, as much as it might be an inconvenience, maybe it'll be further away, it does at least lead me to maybe want to gravitate to that. And maybe that will eventually, in enough time, and people are given the opportunities to maybe gravitate towards, because just like now, there's certain places in this country that I'd prefer to live because of the particular culture of the community that I live in. So that is one area where I think both of you are correct, is at least allowing some semblance of competition or of these competing, practices or ideas, because that's just like with English or British common law, how it all come to fruition, is there was all kinds of ups and downs, peaks and valleys, ins and outs, right? A lot of shit had to be hammered out over, centuries before we even got to the place where there was anything remotely resembling universal laws in terms of, against murder or rape and stuff. So I think you're both on the right track here. And once again, this is proven as based on both your opinion, that you come in with the good ideas. You're both taking, as far as I'm concerned, the moral and ethical stance. It's just showing that, like I was trying to say early on to people, stop trying to suggest that this is one of those things where you're going to say my way, the highway, because all you're doing is shutting down the conversation. And what I'm seeing today is not only you guys not shutting down each other's conversation, I think you're elevating each other. And I guarantee you're both going to walk away, I know I am, thinking a whole lot more about this issue than I have already so far. So thank you very much, both of you, for doing this. Really, really, and continue. Go on.
Thanks. I've taken a few notes here. So it's interesting, Bennett, that you mentioned the slavery side, or that we've gotten there, because in my estimation, and this is backed up by some other historians, not that I'm a historian, but slavery was already on the decline as the U.S. went into civil war. Because a lot of the slaves were not blacks. They were indentured servitudes who were other whites. So that process already started to happen. The fact that they wrote the Constitution the way they did and tried to enforce their views and, you know, caused the Civil War and drew out all that bloodshed. But I think the way Patrick is going about it would still end up going where he wants to go, just without government enforcement, if that makes sense. It's like the same thing, you know, like we have all these pride parades now. And if you go talk to these people, it's like, oh my God, I hope the religious people don't show up. And it's like, well, why not? How did you get your rights if you weren't out there talking and protesting, right? To say that they can't be there having their peace just means they're going to be in some dark hole somewhere saying it. Right. So we need to have these open conversations, because that's how, at the end of the day, we develop morality. In my mind, is individuals have to agree. We can't enforce this thing. So just on a couple notes, Patrick, just out of curiosity, and don't get too specific, but where generally do you live? Are you in a city, one of the big cities in Canada, rural?
I'm in Guelph, which is near Toronto.
Okay. Yeah. No, I'm familiar. I grew up in Niagara, Muskoka area, stuff like that. Which is why, given I grew up in Niagara and around Toronto, I think you're giving human species entirely way too much credit. Take a look at Toronto, man. So, you know, you made this comment about history, and we have all this history, and yet we have a resurgence of socialism. If we had an election today in Canada, who would win?
Trudeau.
It'd be Trudeau, right? And hands down Trudeau. He'd probably get a majority actually today, with all the money he's fucking handed out lately. And if they had an election in the South right now, you might end up with a socialist U.S. government, believe it or not, despite all the history that we have and all the proof of where that leads and what that does to economies and people and all that sort of stuff. So I like the idea that you brought up that, and I'm having trouble remembering the name of the book, the Superstition.
The Most Dangerous Superstition.
Thank you. And again, I will go back to my comments that government is the new, not superstition, religion. Because I think religion as a superstition, because so in my religious mind, most people, and again, I'll just apply a Pareto principle to this, but 80% of the population need something to explain their life and why they're here and what their purpose is. And 20% don't. 20% are fine without religion and they have a moral compass without that overlying concept. But 80% of the population do not, and they need that. And in ANCAP society, I think that 80% of the population is going to cause you problems. So theoretically, this is my problem. Theoretically, I think we could get there. The hesitation I have is, I think, dragging the other 80% of the people along with it, because those people want to be led. They want other people doing the work. They would happily have slaves if there was nothing moral about it. That's why half population has kids, is because it's slave labor.
Yeah, I'm not sure I agree with the pessimism. I hear what you're saying, that there are certainly large amounts of people, especially in this day and age and in these countries, that do want socialism and that do look to a ruler figure and want to be ruled and want to have laws imposed that are sweeping over the entire population. And so, yes, as much as that is true, in the current state, I wouldn't agree that it is as immutable as you're making it out to seem. That is, it's not as unchangeable. I think that people can change, and it might take time. It might take decades or centuries. But I think that if we look at the course of human history, and also on a global scale, right? Obviously, Canada and the States, government is a lot bigger than it has been in the past. But we also see in Hong Kong, for example, there's a lot of people who are fighting for democracy, which isn't exactly freedom, but at least more free than what the CCP is imposing upon them. So I think and just the libertarian movement in general is still very young, right? A lot of these ideas have only been around for a few decades and are only just beginning to be promulgated. But I think there's a lot of people who are really open to libertarian ideas. And I think with the rise of YouTube technology, our capacity to get our message out there is way bigger than it ever has been before. That, alongside all of the proof of the superiority of capitalism over against socialism, I think it's only a matter of time before we wake up. Like, you know, there was a time when people thought that the Earth revolved around the sun revolved around the Earth, and, right? Like, so just in terms of the science of it, we're gaining so much knowledge. It continues to impress me just how most of the physics and chemistry we know is like the past 100 years we learned. Like this is recent as far as human development is going, and then technological development as well. And so I think there's definitely a case to be made that we don't necessarily know what's coming in the future, and we don't know what humanity is capable of. But I think that people are becoming more educated. They're beginning to understand scarcity. They're beginning to understand the dangers of totalitarianism. And it might take decades or centuries, but I do think that we will eventually see a large majority awakening, so to speak, of people coming to understand that libertarianism is both practically and morally the best political philosophy.
God, I hope they're understanding scarcity.
Yeah.
God, I hope so.
Yeah. Let me just ask both of you gentlemen. I just want to ask you both, you gentlemen. I think you both kind of admitted. So you both would you suggest when you were growing up? Did you have Christianity as a part of your morality, the teachings of morality, or were either you atheists growing up?
So I was raised in the church, and I'm still a Christian, Christ follower.
And I grew up Anglican. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. No, that's what I was asking. Yeah.
I grew up Anglican and was forced to go to communion until I was 16 and could make an adult choice.
So once again, and this is just anecdotal, but based on my interactions, I do find, and once again, there are exception outliers for sure, but I do find most people who come to libertarianism, and I would imagine, especially in particular, and John, you're probably about roughly my age or so. You're a Gen Xer, I would assume, right?
48.
Yeah.
48.
And a lot of the teachings that I find that seems to be something that's quite different, especially for us, the generations, Gen X, or even some millennials, I would suggest, it was mostly the teachings of the New Testament and Jesus Christ, and the emphasis on the individual and all that stuff. Because if you go back into the Old Testament, you get a lot of this stuff where there's the contradictions, just like the state. And I think that's why libertarians find the modern form of Christianity as the teachings under the New Testament and Jesus Christ as the emphasis fall in line with the NAP and libertarianism quite easily, because they both kind of reckon with each other and they align with each other because of the facts of the emphasis on the individual and they're trying to destroy the contradiction. So, the Old Testament, it was don't do this, but God will smite thee, right? If you're doing something so it's just like the state. You're not allowed to use force or violence against people that aren't doing anything harmful to you, but that's what the state does, right? That is the goal. So once again, it's getting away. I think the state, just like with some of the mysticism from some of the old world religions that was really meant to control people, right? Those things seem to be so aligned, and why I can't help but express and emphasize, and I think both you gentlemen agree, why libertarianism and putting the individual, as well as, like I say, the modern teachings of Christianity, and using Jesus as the character, the figure, to emphasize the importance of the individual. Because really, at the end of the day, as we're seeing, even with two great gentlemen like yourselves hammering out, and you guys, like I say, have made amazing points here. This is actually one of the better streams I've done, because I really like to hear people talk about these things and you can tell you're both informed and you know what you're talking about. But this is showing that without the individual, and if we just think like with that group mentality, is we're denying these kind of beautiful, unique characteristics of each of you individual and the unique characteristics of all these other humans, which is why it's so important. If you're going to make a decision to, let a life survive or die, this is the importance. One of those people, one of those babies, one of those embryos who could very well, right, have come to live and be the next John or Patrick or another great person in society. Now, of course, there's the flip side of that too. Could be a terrible, but this once again shows so much the importance of not just putting the individual as the emphasis in society and morality and ethics as it pertains to the individual, but even when you're talking about the unborn, because those are areas where, once again, humans have compassion. And if it's your own bloodline, when you're thinking about it from some out of perspective that's not you, right, some abstract, but when it's you, it definitely changes the fundamentals and how you think about these things, which is why it's so important to bring this kind of nuance to the conversation. And I guarantee I've listened to some of these people in some of the media, although not so much in recent years, but try to cover this issue. And I tell you, you guys have done a much better job than I've heard. Like, even if you were sitting watching Dr. Phil or something, I think both of you guys have brought some great conversation to the table that's going to give a lot of people some food for thought.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks.
No, thanks for that. And I have a few other points that I want to bring up. Yeah. So one of the things that we brought up about 10 or 15 minutes ago was this idea of the importance of having an open dialogue. and being able to talk about these things. And I really appreciate the conversation we're having today, because it is giving me food for thought, and hopefully some of the viewers food for thought as well. And free speech is a huge pillar of a free society, and I think we can all agree on that. And that's kind of what I want to shift towards is, okay, so there may be areas where we disagree on like exactly how the law should approach abortion. I think there are also a lot of areas with respect to abortion that libertarians can agree on, and that we can work together to champion. And so one of those would be free speech. I am appalled at the bubble zone laws in Ontario. Just for context, for those who may not know, basically there is a zone that's like 50 meters up to 150 meters around abortion clinics in Ontario, where there basically isn't free speech. The law literally says you may not express any anti-abortion sentiment using oral, written, or graphic means. I think that is a gross infringement of free speech, not only on a moral level, but also of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms in Canada. And so I think one of the issues that libertarians need to be standing together with is we need to be allowed to have these conversations. We need to at least be allowed to protest. And so I think free speech is a big one there. A few others that I think we can agree on and work together with is...
I'll just say before I continue on, that I don't think you'll get any disagreement from me or John. I don't want to speak for John, but you're agreeing there. So we're all on the same page there, 100%.
Perfect. And I really appreciate that, because these conversations are so important. So that's an area we can work together. A couple other areas that I've thought of is, first of all, obviously just free markets. One of the reasons people have abortions is because they're poor and they can't afford to have their child. And so I think the more that we can give people the freedom to create their own means to support their children, I think that people don't always see the connection between economics and people's livelihoods and people's ability to feed their family, but there absolutely is that connection. And so supporting free markets is another.
It's becoming clearer and clearer every day.
Yeah, exactly. And then, as I alluded to earlier, funding crisis pregnancy centers and family support. And then the last one I want to get to, which I think is an area that has massive opportunity that is not being discussed nearly enough, is adoption. I think that adoption is a really great idea. It's a great process, and it's great that it can be another choice, right? We talk about choice. Libertarians are all about choice. Abstinence is a choice. Contraception is a choice. Motherhood is a choice. Adoption is another choice that I think we really need to be talking about. And I think it's really, really sad that the government is incredibly involved in the adoption process. It takes way too long. It's incredibly expensive. It's incredibly difficult. And I don't think that is helpful for anyone, both for the parents who are looking to adopt a child and for the parents who are potentially considering aborting their child because they can't adopt or whatever. And so I think one thing that would be a practical solution that we can work together on, despite our disagreement on the legal approach, is saying, let's get government out of the adoption process. Let's tear away these regulations, these expenses. Let's make adoption so much easier, so much smoother, so much cheaper. That is going to save lives. That's going to help parents get kids that maybe they wouldn't otherwise be able to have kids. And that's a libertarian thing, that is government is interfering in this massive area of our lives that I think we should stand together to say, from both a pro-life and a pro-choice perspective, government needs to get out of adoption.
Absolutely. And actually, if I can just carry on from that, you were mentioning these things that are choices. You know what else is a choice? Is parenting.
Yeah.
So somewhere else we need to get government out of is our schools.
Yes.
So
absolutely.
I'll go back to the sex ed stuff that went around Ontario, because I was, I still have a lot of friends and stuff back there, and I was into that. And the amount of people that said, oh my God, how will my kids ever learn about consent if they're not taught about it in school, was mind-boggling.
Yeah.
My 3-year-old knew about consent. Right. And now I'm not about this crazy, you should ask your baby permission to change its diapers because it's an individual and all this kind of leftist crap. But at the end of the day, parents need to be parents and teach their kids things. And that, I think, is what's missing most. And that also goes back to this nuclear family discussion that we had. Not the nuclear family, but the idea of two parents and having these role models and having a good, strong male role model to feed these kids that part of life. And it's super important. I'm homeschooling my kids this year because of everything that happened.
Nice.
We ended up homeschooling last year. Thank you. It's
Not easy. I don't have a lot of patience, but I'm learning.
Congrats
And
to you, John.
thanks. You need to get government out of things so parents actually do what they're supposed to again. Period. And just on another one, we're back talking about superstition stuff. I just want to, a comment here really took me by surprise. Justin says, up yours. It was at 10:56. Since the spirit form doesn't enter the fetus until 21 days after conception, technically it's not an abortion before the 21 days. But then he goes on to say, talking with April, where's your proof? I don't believe in the unreal. I believe in science. So he's talking about the spirit infesting a physical manifestation, but then he's talking about believing in science. So this is where I have a problem with some libertarians are not necessarily some people who want to follow libertarian values have a problem actually being morally and philosophically libertarian. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense? Which is where I have a problem. Theoretical ANCAP, practical minarchist. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I hope you're right, Patrick. I hope we can get there, but I think it's going to take an existential evolution of humanity to get us to that point. Yeah. And I'm a pessimistic optimist.
Fair enough.
I'm also a prepper, if that makes sense, right? Plan for the worst, but hope for the best.
Yes.
You're hedging big time, John.
Absolutely. That's life, man. It's risk management.
I totally get it.
I think it's important to distinguish between the science and the ethics. Science says that a unique human life is created at conception. It is human and it is alive. Yep. That is not a debate. Nope. I do not believe that the fetus is a unique human life. I acknowledge it. It's a scientific fact. Now, we can have a debate about the ethics of whether it's right to kill that life and what the legal system should be around the killing of that life. I think that's an important discussion to be had, but I think it's very important to distinguish the science and the ethics and to not compromise on the scientific facts. And then the other thing I was going to point out is that I absolutely agree with you. The thing about libertarianism is it's not about preferences, it's about principles. And you don't get to pick and choose which laws you like, which choices you want to let people make. And this is one of the things that really drew me to it, is I have a principled stance that informs my approach to all of these decisions and all of these positions. As much as my individual preferences may vary, I cannot be a libertarian if I am not principled on all of those matters.
Absolutely.
Hey, Patrick, actually, let me just ask, just because I would feel that anyone that watching this now or might watch this later probably want me to, and I don't usually like to do the whole devil's advocate thing, but I'm pretty sure you got a good answer for this anyways. But just when you were bringing up the scenario with the abortion, and I, like I say, I was completely in agreement with you there. It's just I'm just kind of testing what your response would be when people bring up, because I'm sure you might have heard this before. Oh, Patrick wants to set up a market for like, well, hey, I'll just plop out kids and sell them. That's a good way to make a living, right? But I don't know if you ever heard, because I've actually heard people that have used that as an excuse or a pushback to something that kind of talked along lines like what you were saying, where is people say, well, I could, maybe people could, offer to buy, like you have a kid, and even today you see that taking place where people have become surrogate parents and stuff. But what do you say in terms of the moral implications in terms of defense and defending your position there?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I do take the radical ANCAP notion that there should be no restrictions if you would like to sell your child. I think that's far from ideal. I don't think that's preferable. I don't think we should try to achieve a society where that is a norm by any means. But I'm also not going to use violence and force and coercion to stop people from doing that if they legitimately think it's their best option. Because here's the deal. Yes, if you relax all laws around adoption, you may get a market for babies. You may get people selling their children, and you may get some very weird arrangements. That is not preferable. But we have to ask ourselves if the alternative is hundreds of abortions a day in Canada, right? Millions of abortions a year globally. Okay, we're dealing with two bad situations. I am okay allowing a relatively free market, if you want to call it that, in adoption, if the alternative is that the child is going to be killed. And so I think that's the perspective that we need to have is, okay, what we're allowing is probably not morally preferable, but what's the alternative here? And if the alternative is abortion, then I think there's a good case to say, you know what, let's let people make their own choices. And I think that that's going to be better in the long run.
Yeah. Did you want to say anything about that, John? Oh, your mic there. Yeah.
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, so I think there's one important aspect, Patrick, that you just missed, and I see this happening all the time when we talk about statism and stuff, and that's you're assuming that we're not already selling babies.
Yeah.
and guaranteed we are, right? Yep. So the idea in support of what you just said is that we cannot regulate that. And I don't mean regulate by laws and government. I mean regulate by best practice.
Mm-hmm.
If we take government out of it, we bring, just like the cannabis market and hard drugs and all that other shit that we don't want people doing. If we shove it by the wayside and shove it in a dark alley, we can't deal with it. We can't even have a free speech discussion about it because we're hiding it. So by pulling government out of it, we can say, okay, yes, there's a market for it. What's the best way to do this? How do we benefit the child? But then I would go back. So that was just that comment, but I would go back to the other thing where I think what Buddy there, just say up yours, was getting at was that 21 days is when the heartbeat comes into the fetus. I think that's what he was talking about with the spirit, right?
Okay.
So while, yes, we believe in science, what science do you believe in? The baby being an independent clump of cells, or the heartbeat being there? Because there's different levels of science, right? We're seeing this right now around the COVID debate. What science do we listen to, and how much science do we listen to? Because if we listen to all the science, we're never going to leave our freaking homes again.
Yeah, and there's a difference between science and speculation. So a lot of COVID modeling and such is speculative. We know the science of fetal development, obviously not perfectly, but we know it pretty well. And my point in that would simply be that from a strictly biological perspective, it's always a difference in degree, right? We begin developing when we are conceived, and we don't stop developing arguably until we're about 25, is they're saying, when brain development comes into full fruition. And all of those are little steps of degrees, and cognition, heartbeat, identifiable limbs, those are all degrees of development, which are noteworthy, but as far as I'm concerned, not morally relevant.
Okay, so let's get back to your ANCAP idea of, yes, you can sell babies.
Sure.
When in your ANCAP society does that kid that was sold into slavery, purposeful slavery to take care of it and raise it and educate it and that sort of stuff, when does that child be able to emancipate itself?
Yeah. So
where does that shift? Because there has to be a shift there somewhere, right?
Yes. And that gets into the whole discussion about children's rights and children in libertarianism. I guess the first thing I would say is children is a difficult topic for libertarians. Understanding what are the rights of children, what is the age of consent, that's a hard question to answer. I would start by pointing out that it's also a hard question to answer from a statist perspective. Just because it's difficult to apply libertarian principles to children doesn't mean it's any easier for the government to handle it. With that said, I personally think the age of consent should be somewhere around 13. That's obviously a lot lower than where most people would put it, but I think that there's biological development. You're going through puberty, and you've also been around enough that you kind of understand how the world works. People are having sex when they're like 14 or 15 and making adult choices, right? So I think that it's certainly an important discussion. I don't have a good answer. I don't have a clear answer. And this is what I like to say to people. I don't know. And that's the point. Yeah. The fact that it's a gray area, the fact that I don't have the perfect answers is precisely the point, because in light of that, we need competition in rules. We need, as you were saying, Bennett, best practices that are enabled by free markets. We need a way to have these conversations, be able to talk about it as a society and sort through these issues, and let the best practices win out and let the inefficient ones or the immoral ones get weeded out. So I don't have a good answer. I have some principles that I try to apply. Obviously, we want parents to be raising their children in healthy homes. But I think the fact that I don't have a good answer is precisely why the government probably also doesn't have a good answer. And so let's leave the government out of it and have a conversation and find a better way to sort out this problem.
And I think that's the absolute best approach to have. Well, I'm just looking at some of the comments here while you were talking. Stable Genius, 18. Carte blanche, 18. But their dad ran away for good at 14. So the problem with laws is they are carte blanche. Right. And we have to have that gray area, room for discussion, room for moral ambiguity, room for individuality. I don't know what else to say besides that, Patrick, because I thought that was a great way to kind of sum up the I do have to go here soon, guys. I've got work to do. I think that was a great way to sum up the conversation, Patrick. Like, just 100%.
Perfect. Thanks.
And you know, sorry, just one more thing. I watched my mom at the age of 70 drag herself through the Anglican Church acknowledging homosexuality.
Sorry, you were just kind of cutting in a little bit out there, John. What was it you said there?
So I said, I watched my mom at 70 years old drag herself through the Anglican Church accepting homosexuality into the church.
Oh, really?
Right. Ordaining gay priests and marrying gay and 70 plus, God rest her soul, drug herself through the New Testament stuff, and evolved. But it was a very hard journey for her. It was very individual. And no one was going to tell her at the end of the day, no spiritual or government entity was going to tell her what to think. Yeah. She was working through that shit on her own. You know what I mean? And it was a long, hard process for her.
Right.
But this is where we have to go, right?
Yeah. Well, just before you go, and you have kids of your own, do you, John? Or
yeah, I have two. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm sure you, even as a father, when you were raising your children, this is the big thing for me, which I would suggest that anyone's paying attention to this stream, is what I've always used for myself, is if you want to, now it's not perfect, but if you perceive a society and government, right, as mommy and daddy and society as being the kids, right, just like if you were raising your kids, if you wanted to set up some rules of engagement, whether you're talking like social or economic engagements, just like when I was raising my kids, there are very very important rules, but they're very minimal. The most important thing for me was to make sure that the rules were minimal, but backed up, and not just because they're mine, because of dad's might makes right, but because I hold myself to the same rules, and the rules were like the simple stuff like don't hit, don't steal, like the kind of stuff that we both. But once again, it's that conversation, it's the importance of that freedom of speech, and being once again having a little bit of leeway because of these potential circumstances. It's their willingness to come and engage and have a conversation with me. So even my sons, and there's been times in their lives where they may be asked my advice in terms of things, and I could kind of offer my opinion. But at the end of the day, it wasn't just the fact that I said don't hit, don't steal. It was all those other underlining like I say, stories, personal experiences, examples, real life examples where you were placed in these situations, and maybe your initial opinion or perspective might have had to change because of extenuating circumstances that you didn't initially take into account. But the importance is, once again, is to respect each other as individuals and allow for people to use these things as a means to deal with people or circumstances or situations in that more free market situation. Because once again, my kids would never be able to make the right decisions today if I told them that it was so rigid that everything that I said, it had to be that way, my way, the highway, without them being able to think critically about issues, because then they're not actually thinking on the fly. And there's never going to be a situation where I'm going to be able to paint the scenario and say, I know what's best for every possible situation or scenario. What it is I can give them those tools, and hopefully they'll be able to use them themselves when they put themselves in a situation, just like what a judge is supposed to do when they're being the arbiters and decision makers for disputes, is they have to take all these extenuating circumstances into account and come to something that is the goal. If the goal at the end of the day is, whether you're dealing with the court of law, is justice, or whether you're talking about society in terms of proper morals and ethics, if your goal is morals and ethics, keep that as the central focal point. And if you keep that as the central focal point, then, like I say, you'll find ways to get there. But it's the importance is, once again, not trying to set us all up into this one size fits all approach, because as we know, there's going, just like the person in the tree that might have to jump, smash your window to get in. We can't set up situations where they're so rigid to the point where you allow bad people to be, or good people to be harmed, and bad people to get away with doing the harming because they found a way to game the system or use the principles that they pretend that they're adhering to as a means to trick the people and put them in a vulnerable situation. So at the end of the day, once again, the principles important. And just like with society, I would say don't hit, don't steal. Those are very important, and that's what we want to stick to. And if you want to see how they work out best, is not just lead by example, but use those countless examples in not just your own lives, but like I say, in the music you write, in the stories you tell on the screens, or the people that talk on the radio, or the philosophers, or like I say, any leaders. if people are leading by example and showing that this is the way that you do it, right, is you use all these tools at our disposal, then you will find a society that's more conducive to not being perfect, because we're never going to get to perfect, but are much more closer to, because with my kids, like I say, they make mistakes, I've made mistakes, but how we separate ourselves and seems like how I've done better than many other people. First of all, I try not to be a walking, talking contradiction, because that, first of all, if you're not living, if you're trying to raise your kids and you're not adhering to the very principles that they're telling you to, telling your kids to adhere to, well, they're not going to take you serious. They're going to think that he's just, once again, it's the might make right. Then they live in and they'll try to adopt that in their own life, because they see that too can be successful. But using that kind of success is a short-term success. The reason why I've been successful over the entire course of my life is even because I faltered and made mistakes. I keep coming back to and owning up to the mistakes I made and making sure that I'm sticking to, once again, every time I falter, to getting back to the place that's more conducive for not just my happiness and my prosperity, but what's going to work for not just me, but my kids and that community, for all of us in the long run game. Because that's what we're talking about here, is a long run game. What we can do that's going to be beneficial to ourselves in the moment doesn't mean it's going to be beneficial for us in the long run. So the young girl that was just irresponsible and got that aborted that pregnancy, and she prolonged or procrastinated to the point where maybe you were getting into the second trimester even, she might be allowed to make that decision because it's her body, her choice, right? But she's going to live with those consequences. And if the people in her peer group or in her community or her parents, told her beforehand, you're going to deal with, you can do that. You can go ahead and abort that child, but now other people are going to perceive you in a different manner, a different light, and that's going to affect your relationships with other people going forward. Once again, if you just give them the ability to think about these issues more critically, I think most people, for not just their self-preservation, but for that long-term prospect, because most people will recognize, if they're given the right opportunity to do so, is that there's long-term prospects in their life. So making sure that you're doing the decision that's going to be beneficial for not just you, but for you tomorrow, next month, next year. But anyways, that's all I wanted to say in terms of that. And then you guys finish up saying whatever you got to say, and then we'll tie this one up.
And part of this is, I think you're absolutely right, Bennett. And part of this is the fact that we're teaching rules and not principles. Because we've lost that underlying, and I'll just say religious, but we've lost that underlying meaning behind these, which is why one of the things I've bought for my kids, I don't know if you're familiar with the Tuttle Twins series of books.
Right. Yes. Yes.
From Connor Boyack. So I bought that entire series. I've got the workbooks. We read through that stuff. And that, to me, like, my 9-year-old runs around saying, taxation is theft. Government is stupid. And I'm like, that's awesome. But can you explain it? Don't just run around repeating me because that's what I said. I want you to understand what's going on. So we watch TV, they watch, like, when you teach rules but not principles, you end up burning down half the fucking country down south.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, because vandalism is not bad. Right? Property is not the same. Bullshit. Right? We need to get back to the principles behind things.
Yes, for sure.
And I don't know how to do that because I'm not a religious person. I don't see religion coming back. But we need to find a way to get back there. And I think number one is taking governments out of schools.
For sure.
Getting parenting back to doing parent stuff.
Yeah, that's definitely a really good start. Ayn Rand said, you can avoid reality, but you can't avoid the consequences of avoiding reality. And I really love that because it speaks to the fact that, guess what? There are actions that are going to lead you in a right direction and a wrong direction. And you are defined by your choices. And I love this whole theme of taking responsibility, owning your mistakes, and continuing to work towards what's going to make a healthy, prosperous society. Guess what? None of us are perfect. We're all going to make mistakes. We're all broken human beings. And yet, if we can come together with these principles and hold each other accountable for them and take responsibility for our actions, which I think is something that government paternalism just negates. It's interesting. Like, paternalism really is the word I use because the root word is pater, which means father, right? And it's this idea that the state is a fatherly figure. That's the same root as the word patronizing, right? When you patronize someone, you're talking down to them and you're treating them with apparent kindness that betrays a feeling of superiority. And that's exactly how the state treats people. And that's exactly, I think, the problem is that, because what that does is it undermines personal responsibility. It undermines people being held accountable for their actions. But I think if you have that accountability, if you have that responsibility, if you have that focus on the individual, then we can be creating actions that are leading to healthy, prosperous societies. And whether it's abortion, adoption, or any other issues, individual responsibility is going to be a much better way, a much more principled way to tackle these issues.
Absolutely.
Well said. 100%. I think that was a perfect way, because just like you're saying, it is that personal responsibility at the end of the day that's going to be the biggest determining factor. And we're not, like, I think we all acknowledge, I mean, there's been rules on the books for a long time that murder is wrong, right? Murder still happen. Just like all these scenarios we set up, if you could create some government regulation, it has never prevented people from doing bad things.
Nope.
It's people that have ill intentions or are immoral or who want to commit immoral acts. No law that's going to be written on the book is going to prevent that from happening. But like you say, it's that individual, that personal responsibility, and the fact that they're going to have to live and function in that world, right, as they go through life. That is the most important thing. It's not going to perfect things, just like with eBay, right? eBay, people can get on eBay and mess up all day long. But the thing that prevents eBay from getting to the point where you have all the bad actors completely dominating is that reputation, and is the fact that you have to deal with people going forward, right? And really, that's what we have at the end of the day. I don't need to use force or violence, but if my neighbor is a thief and the rest of the people in society recognize he's a thief, we're not going to do anything. We're not going to trade with him. He's not, if he needs help or not. That is a huge incentive, rather than some guy writing something down on a piece of paper in Ottawa. That's much more of an incentive for my neighbor to maybe correct some of those bad habits or behaviors, right? Because like I said, he recognized that he's going to live, and he's not going to do it because he's benevolent for me. Because once again, I'm not even going to pretend that all people are going to be benevolent, because I believe that all people are just good inherently. Maybe most of the time. But the person, just like Ayn Rand and objectivists and the free market, or Adam Smith, just like all these people that understand, it's that self-interest. Now, that's one thing I do understand, that all people, just like all animals in nature, self-interest. That's the only reason why the species survives. That's the only reason why their bloodline or whatever continues on, is because most people, or all people, are all about self-preservation. Well, maybe a few exception people, they get to some point in time, they might want to choose to take their lives, maybe somewhere. But most people, it's all about self-preservation. So I would rather rest and rely on people's inherent selfishness rather than the pretense of benevolence. But I'd also want to add into the equation those great teachings that brings benevolence to the table as well. Once again, it doesn't have to be a one size fits all. There's multitudes of ways that'll put people on the right path, doing the right things and making the right choices. And that's what it happens. That's what the free market does. It brings all kinds of incentive structures, and rewards you for good decisions and punish you for bad decisions.
That's how we need to deal with China.
Right on.
I just want to talk Church of Entropy here. The solution, John, is to stop questing for freedom, which doesn't exist, and to be mindful of duty. I don't see those two things as having to be separate. There was a good analogy that I heard. I don't remember where I got it from, but human beings are like snuggly porcupines. Right? We want to be with each other, but we've got these big barbs, and when we get too close, we prick each other. So we need to figure out how to fit together so we can be snuggly and happy without pricking each other. And that's just the reality of it.
Yeah.
So the individual liberty and sense of duty are not two separate concepts. They're actually very intertwined.
Very much so, yeah.
And I talk about this with my kid right now. Like the book we started with was iPencil. Thank God before COVID, because man, iPencil has come back up over. How come you can't buy cars? How come we can't do that? Because no one knows how to build a pencil, dear.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that iPencil is great. And I love to do that even for especially younger people that don't understand things and haven't worked in that physical workforce where you're doing a lot of productive labor per se. Is just if you consider a pencil, there's only 4 or 5 parts in that whole thing. But look at what it requires. What it requires just to bring one pencil to fruition. And when I see the automobiles today and how much people destroy things so willy-nilly, if you had any grasp or firm understanding in the kind of work, the kind of effort that went into just producing that just one. Never mind the millions and millions of them, right? It'd give you a much more appreciation for these things. And that really is another thing that I think is very important, is to teach people and to teach your children to have appreciation no matter what situation or circumstances that you find yourself in, is to try to find and measure and balance out the positive and the negative. Because just like she said you're a pessimist optimist. Well, yes, because some days, and you know what, that's the point, the reason why we can be pessimistic and optimistic is because it's very important. That's what guides our decisions in life, right? That we have to be. If we just were constantly always positive and never thinking there was anything negative happen, well, we'd be quite caught off guard many times in our life. So we have to be pessimistic, and that's what helps gauge and guide our decisions going forward. So yeah, I'm all for, like you say, figuring these things out on the fly, talking to each other, because at the end of the day, really, if you get to the point where you're not talking to each other like me and Patrick and John are doing here, right? What is your option? To avoid and ignore each other, and we're not going to be able to live as social creatures, because that's what human beings are. Like as if we're isolated on an island all by ourselves. We are, like I say, we are social creatures, but we have to accept the fact that there are some things that we use as in terms of rules of engagement. And I use this example. I've used it many times in the past. Just like if you were sitting down to play a board game together, call it the game of life. Hey, there's actually a board game called the game of life, but really that's what we're talking about. Is there has to be some rules of engagement. And while you're dealing with people, that's the only interaction that we're going to be able to use as the basis. Doesn't mean it's going to be perfect, but it's going to give us the best chance in life to be able to go through most of our lives, not unharmed ever at any time, but it's going to give us the most meaningful life, because that's the side with the personal responsibility, is that's what's giving you the meaning, right? My kids don't just do this stuff that I told them was a good idea. It was because they see when I did the right thing, even if it was against the bad thing, it brought real meaning, a real sense of purpose for me. And that's something that they want to feel, because you can't get that from just anything. That sense of purpose, that sense of meaning means that you've done something principled. You've taken a moral or ethical approach in something, and you made that as your guiding cornerstone. And that's really important, because that, like I say, that is very fulfilling.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, thanks, guys. Like I say, I really appreciate that. And thanks for all you folks that joined into this stream today. And I'm hoping that, like I say, I'll be able to get out and have some more conversations like this. In terms of Patrick and Carol, you guys, I want you and John, please keep in contact with me, because if there's any other topics going forward that you might be interested in, both of you, I think I finally found a couple gentlemen that, like I say, I find I tend to dominate a lot of conversations a lot of time, because some of the people that I participate in conversations with, I can kind of sense, just like when I'm out talking with people, if people don't have a whole lot to offer, I feel like I got to fill that void. This conversation, I did not feel that at all. You guys both brought your team, and like I say, more than happy to hear the way you guys talk. And I'm more than willing any other time going forward to sit more on the sideline and talk when I feel appropriate to do so, but allowing other people to bring their opinions and perspective in, because that's the other thing. It's at the end of the day, it's not about me. It's about these ideas, about these principles, and as much as I can get and help spread them around, and if I can use you gentlemen to help me to end, then I'd be more than appreciative to do that. And like I say, I'm fairly certain you'd be able to hold your toes, or hold your own in any conversation regarding any topic based on what you've said so today.
I'm always willing to have a chat. I've usually got an opinion on stuff. So
awesome.
And I think
likewise for me.
I think the best part is the conversations that are going on right now in the chat.
Yeah. Oh, I love
really
it too.
Good, really good talk going on.
Yeah, some days I'll actually start a stream and I have a whole thing I'm going to do, and I have all the stuff in the background, but just by reading the comments, I'll just end up, and then I don't even get to do. But that's what I mean. And that's, I think, what most people are yearning for. Just like when Jordan Peterson was out doing his speaking tour, he kept hammering away how much it was important to do that, because he recognized there were thousands and thousands and thousands, and in particular, a lot of young men that just want to hear some real goddamn conversations from people who actually care about these issues profoundly, and they're not doing it to, economically reward themselves or to pat themselves on the back. It's just because they realize the importance of doing so. And you guys have obviously brought that to this conversation. And like I say, I know there are a lot of people who will definitely take advantage of listening to this stuff, and they'll realize that there are people out there who are willing to put aside their own egos, have these conversations, these discussions, and for the reason, no other reason other than to get people to seriously thinking critically about these issues, rather than this constant fucking stupid sound bites that you hear on the established media or from the political class, which just keeps people more confused. The reason why people are constantly arguing with each other is because no one's giving them any clear and concise language. So they're arguing against shit that they truly don't understand, because no one has ever given the proper information to think critically about them.
Just have a conversation. Stop yelling at people.
Yeah.
Talk.
Exactly.
That's it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All right. Anything you want to say before we tie it up there, Patrick?
No, I really appreciate this format, because we are able to talk, and that's what's going to move this forward. So thank you for putting this together.
Awesome. All right.
Thank you. And nice meeting you.
Yes,
You
nice
too.
meeting both you too. And both of you have yourself a great weekend. And same with everyone in the chat. We'll see you in the next one. It's Canadian Libertarian, and I love liberty.